If you could please top off the coffee and grab a seat, we'll get started. Good morning. For those of you that we would welcome having some folks up front, so bring your cup of coffee and wander towards the front. It would help the speakers have at least a little more eye contact. And we're going to get rolling here. Good morning. The party and the brave are out this morning, and we appreciate that. My name is Dan Fessenden, and we're going to have a topic this morning that came at us yesterday in the form of snow and ice, and today we're going to talk about water. And the topic that, I'm worried our microphone is temperamental. The topic we're going to talk about is something that Wednesday Morning Roundtable on a couple of different occasions has had an occasion to discuss and think about relative to water and water quality, our water resources. And it bears a little bit of understanding and backdrop as to why this topic in a community like Cayuga County matters. And you only have to look at our geography a little bit to understand that we do have a geography that probably dictates that water resources are a little bit more relevant for us than some communities. Is that really annoying? Can you hear me without it? Yeah. Can you really? Yeah. Awesome. So, when you think about water resources, to understand the landscape of our geography and the number of lakes and water bodies that we have in this county, you think about Owasco Lake, obviously, because it's totally encompassed within Cayuga County, and it's a main source of drinking water. So many people live and work and play around and on Owasco Lake. You have Cayuga Lake to our west, you have Skaneateles Lake to our east, you have Lake Ontario, you have Cross Lake, you have Duck Lake, Lake Como. Those are all water resources contained within Cayuga County's range. On top of that, what we also have is some of the best agricultural lands in the country here in Cayuga County. Very distinctive, even from property and agricultural lands 50 or 100 miles from here. And what that has done is created a very long-term, prosperous agricultural industry that continues to have to compete on a global basis. And as a result, has become much more of an intensive business in terms of animal agriculture as well as crop production. And then you throw another factor in there, that agriculture is also being expanded with our abilities to grow grapes and wineries. And all of those things together kind of create a very unique landscape on which Cayuga County has to think about things of water resources, because some of those are pressures on one or the other and back and forth. And that dynamic is something that every day people that think about water resources need to understand and work within those constructs as we think about solutions, policies, practices that are smart, that are going to protect our water resources. So this morning we've got a couple of people that we didn't have to look too far to find that are here with us to talk about this topic with us. And I'm pleased to introduce a couple of people that are sitting over here in the corner as if they've been bad. It's not the case at all.
Not yet.
Not yet, they might be. We'll put them back there if we need to. So I'm going to do a couple of intros and then let each of them have a chance at the microphone to talk a little bit about their work and kind of their approach to some of these topics that I think you're going to find interesting. Ultimately, at the end, as we always do, we'll have some chance for dialogue and Q&A. So first, we'll hear from Steve Lynch this morning. Steve Lynch is someone that many of you probably have known in one of his capacities here working locally. For 22 years, Steve has worked in the area of planning, either for the city of Auburn or for Cuyahoga County more recently. He is the Director of Planning and Economic Development for Cuyahoga County. Steve has been a public servant for all those years, having been trained at SUNY ESF as a planner. Steve brings a lot of great background to his work. For a number of years, he worked for the city of Auburn, and then since 2006, he has been with Cuyahoga County. Steve leads a team of great people that think about a lot of things, everything from community development, economic development, natural resources. They work with all of the towns and villages throughout the county, and he has a great team of people that work on behalf of all of us here in Cuyahoga County, day in and day out. Particularly, Steve's team also supports a water quality management agency. So as a direct kind of oversight role for the county, Steve leads that group and thinking process each and every day. So we're going to hear from Steve first. After Steve, we're going to hear from Drew Snell. Drew is in the far corner. And Drew has been, I'm going to pull up a couple of notes here. He is the watershed specialist for the Owasco Lake Inspection Program. And as such, he has held that position for 3 years. When you talk about a single body of water, it's always easy to focus on the fact that the water itself is the resource, but that resource is affected and impacted by a much larger landmass all around it called its watershed. And so he has a purview throughout all of that area on behalf of the people that rely on, depend on, and want to see Owasco Lake maintained as a strong resource. Drew is a Clarkson graduate, and he has a degree in management and environmental science. And for 15 years, he's worked for the Soil and Water Conservation District program throughout New York State, and then spent 5 years as a program coordinator in Lake Champlain. So he's had some experience in some other watersheds, a much larger body of water when you think about Lake Champlain. But they're committed to protecting the water resource of Owasco Lake. That's his charge every day. He has a small team of people that are devoted to that, and we're looking forward to hearing from Drew in a little bit as well. First, I'm going to let Steve take it over. Steve Lynch, thanks.
Well, thank you, Dan, and good morning, everybody. And let me know if you can't hear me, I'll shout, okay? I'd like to thank the Wednesday Morning Roundtable for having us here this morning to talk about what's very important, as Dan outlined. The resources that we try to protect here and the efforts to do that is a very broad and a very complex undertaking and involves a lot of partners. So there's not that much time this morning to go into depth in every aspect of it. But what I'm going to try to do is to talk about a little bit of just give you an overview. And that'll be looking at the context for water resource protection in Cuyahoga County, a little bit of what Dan just went over, why we are unique in Cuyahoga County when we look at water resource protection, what makes us unique in that respect, how are the offices how are these efforts coordinated in Cuyahoga County through all the different agencies and partners and individuals and efforts, and I'll try to give you an overview of the current and ongoing countywide efforts. And we'll look at water resource protection efforts briefly that are focused specifically on Owasco Lake. So Ben Franklin was a very clever fellow, and I really couldn't have said it any better. Obviously, we need to appreciate and care for what we have before it's gone. You know, because once compromised, water quality is very difficult to bring back from the brink from bad water quality to good water quality, or maybe even impossible in some cases. We all know that water is precious, but how often do we really think about protecting this resource? Well, where would we be without access to clean, abundant water? Where would we be without the water that we use for our daily needs, the water that we drink and that we cook with, the water that we wash our clothes with, the water that we use to grow our foods? Where would our economy be without the water that fuels it? Without clean water, could we support the industrial uses that are bringing jobs to our county, such as Cayuga milk ingredients shown in this picture? Where would we do if we didn't have clean and abundant water for our hospitals, our nursing homes, and our other institutions? Let's not forget about the abundant water that we rely on for recreation, for fishing, for boating, the water that lets us get our connection back to nature in so many ways. And also, where would we, if we really treasure the quality of life here and the abundance around us, we need to protect and preserve it for the future generations. We need to understand that we're all stewards of these resources and that we, all of us, are responsible for the legacy that we'll leave for others. Cayuga County and the Finger Lakes, as Dan talked about, are rich in freshwater resources, but the same is not true for many regions of the nation, and it is getting worse. This is a snapshot of extreme drought conditions in the U.S. from January 2010, showing severe to extreme drought conditions occurring in most of the western states, all of our big ag states. 5 years ago, abnormal drought conditions were beginning to show in these states, with the dairy, fruit, and vegetable growing regions of California starting to experience sustained drought conditions. So you see that picture? Okay, let's go ahead 5 years. This is the same map by the same agencies looking at droughts from January 2016, a month ago. 5 years later, the drought conditions have grown and gotten worse, with extreme drought conditions occurring in all of those areas in California. And now you can see the yellow coming into the northeast, where we're starting to see abnormally dry conditions beginning to show up here, which is, if you came in yesterday or today, you'd probably say, there's plenty of water. But we have here a regional economy that's obviously strongly connected to agriculture. We need to find the balance that protects our water resources while supporting our farms and farmers who, after all, have a majority of the land that we have here under their stewardship. Let's take a look at the land-water interface that Dan talked about in Cayuga County to provide a context for our unique challenge here. Cayuga County has unique challenges in balancing land stewardship and water resource protection that's different than other areas of the state. This map shows the major milk-producing counties in the whole nation. Cayuga County is one of 55 counties in the U.S. that collectively account for more than 50% of all milk production in the country. This places Cayuga County in the top 1.5% of dairy-producing counties in the United States. From a water resource protection perspective, this intense interplay between land use and water resources poses a significant challenge. Looking a little closer at New York State, Wyoming County in western New York is number 1 in dairy production, followed by Cayuga County as number 2. But let's make a comparison. Both counties are very similar in regard to population density, the amount of people per square mile. When considering the degree of interface between the miles of freshwater shoreline and intensive agricultural land uses that dominate the landscape in both counties, Cayuga County, as far as the water resources, far exceeds Washington County and all other counties in the state, and probably the entire Northeast. Simply put, this interface between dairy and agricultural land use and extensive water resources in Cayuga County creates an unprecedented challenges to water resource protection in the county. It places significant responsibilities on all parties that play a role in successfully protecting our water resources. But beyond the agricultural water resource interface that is a uniquely Cayuga County challenge, all water resource protection efforts must address the fact that watersheds are not tied to political boundaries, but transcend municipal boundaries at the village, town, city, and county levels, as some of these maps of watersheds locally and regionally show. Dealing with multiple jurisdictions obviously adds complexity and layers of water resource protection in terms of regulation, coordination, and communication. The geography of watersheds also means that residents and elected officials within watershed areas are often physically detached from the host water body, the watershed that they're in, bringing to mind the old adage, out of sight, out of mind, which is not always a helpful thing to happen. So our land-water interface and the geographic reality of watersheds calls for a great deal of partnerships and coordination when it comes to water resource protection efforts. Let's take a look at how this coordination is managed in Cayuga County. Did you fix it? Everybody can hear me though, right? I'd rather not hold this if everybody can hear me. Thank you though. Very good. All right. In 1990, the Cayuga County created the Cayuga County Water Quality Management Agency, or WQMA, to provide a coordinated approach to water quality management throughout the county. Aimed at addressing both non-point source pollution and the protection of groundwater resources, the primary function of the WQMA is to provide comprehensive water resource planning combined with realistic implementation of goals for effective water quality management. WQMA is charged with coordinating the efforts, the activities, and the responsibilities of its member agencies and organizations to increase public awareness and participation in water quality issues. Here are the members and partners that make up the WQMA, for those of you who don't know the WQMA. All the main water bodies in Cayuga County have associations. They're also members of the WQMA, including the Owasco Lake, Cayuga Lake, Skaneateles Lake, and even some of our smaller lakes like Lake Como and Duck Lake. In addition, there are non-county partners, including the Town of Owasco, the City of Auburn, the Association of Town Supervisors and Association of Villages, and the Central New York Regional Planning and Development Board. Also, the legislature appointed environmental advisors from various county departments and related agencies to serve on the WQMA. This brings environmental engineers, conservation specialists, and other professionals under the agency's umbrella to provide valuable staff resources. And often with regard to the WQMA, they're the groups that are getting the work done on the ground for the most part. The WQMA meets on a monthly basis to coordinate the water resource efforts undertaken by its members and partner agencies. They meet the first Thursday of every month over at the Soil and Water Conservation District at 10 a.m. With an annual work plan to guide and focus its activities, the WQMA organizes its countywide efforts through a series of working groups that we're currently looking at shifting to address some of the rising priorities in water resource protection right now. Let's take a look at the countywide efforts to protect and enhance the resources. When taking a look at this, we can break it down into four main areas of effort: planning and research, standards, practices, and mitigation efforts, compliance and enforcement efforts, and education and communication. Okay, let's start with the planning and research efforts, and I'll try to move through these relatively quick, and I apologize if it seems like I'm reading a little bit, but there's a lot of material to go over, and it's the most organized way to get through this. So the county is engaged in ongoing monitoring and data collection efforts. This work benchmarks the health of our water resources, identifies strategic actions to address problems, and measures the results of our actions so we can gauge the success or failure of the things that we're doing to try to improve water quality. This work includes the Owasco Lake Water Quality Monitoring and Data Collection Project, which is conducted annually by the Finger Lakes Institute at Hobart and William Smith Colleges by Dr. John Halfman. Many of you know Dr. Halfman and the work that he's been doing, and it results in an annual report every year. This ongoing research effort is funded by the county and is essential to tracking water quality trends, both good and bad. Planning and research efforts also include an annual water quality sampling program undertaken by Cayuga County, the Owasco Watershed Lake Association, or AWLA, and other partners. Samples are taken throughout the county watershed areas, analyzed in labs, and the results are tracked and monitored over time. The county also partners across the region and also monitors various aquatic invasive species, which you can see a few pictures of here. In response to the increasing frequency of harmful algal blooms, or blue-green algae as we call it, a surveillance and tracking program has been established. This program will be expanded in 2016 and linked to a community education and communication program, and also inform and support the New York State DEC's statewide research and mitigation efforts for blue-green algae. The county also funds a stream gauge data collection at USGS data stations strategically placed at certain streams in the county's watersheds. This data helps us calculate stream volume and flow so that water samples that are collected and the related research that are done can be calibrated and their components can be accurately measured. There are three more planning and research efforts that I'll mention. One is the Owasco Lake Watershed Management and Recreation Plan currently being drafted. I'll expand on that one in a moment. Another is called the EPA 9 Elements Plan, which will be a 2016 research effort. This has been funded by a 2015 grant through the CFA process that we got last year from the New York State Department of State. The targeted research that will result from this completed EPA 9 Elements Plan will make it possible for the county and its partners to identify and focus on strategic actions to specifically address non-point pollution within the Owasco Lake watershed. This takes all the research that we've been compiling and really starts to pinpoint where the non-point pollution, or this pollution that's more generally distributed throughout the watershed, is concentrated and focused, and how we could look at mitigating that pollution. The last project under planning and research is the Owasco Flats Restoration and Feasibility Report completed a number of years ago. This early report provided the research and rationale for securing grant funding to implement the Owasco Flats Wetland Creation and Restoration Project. Each of these planning and research projects helps to identify standards, establish best practices, and target mitigation efforts needed to protect and enhance our water resources. So let's take a look at some of the work being done under the second category, standards, practices, and mitigation efforts. The Cuba County Soil and Water Conservation District is one of the largest and busiest in all of New York State, and a key partner in our water protection efforts. While it's one of the largest and busiest, it's that for a reason. It's because we have the most interplay between water and land use than almost any other county in New York State. So its size and its activities are very important to the work that we're doing. The district conducts an annual program for farms called the Ag and Environmental Management, or AEM program. This program identifies the best on-farm practices for both soil and water conservation and secures state funding assistance to make sure that these practices are implemented in farms across the county. The county and various partners, including Cornell Cooperative Extension and the Finger Lakes Institute, conduct an annual countywide invasive species management program focused on identifying new invasive threats and mitigating the impacts of invasive species that unfortunately already have a foothold in the county. The Finger Lakes Institute also partners with the county to deploy a lake steward program at public boat launches to educate boaters on best practices to prevent the spread of invasive species between our water bodies here in Cuba County and throughout the region. You'll see lake stewards this summer, I'm very glad to report, over at Owasco Lake at the public boat launches. The Planning Department and the Soil and Water Conservation District partner to educate our municipalities about best practices to manage sediment erosion control during development and day-to-day operations. I don't believe any of these pictures are from Cayuga County, but they could be. The Planning Department has developed an outreach program to introduce these practices to all the shoreline communities in the county and to assist these towns and villages with adopting ordinances and implementing practices that will protect water quality. We hope that they're going to be open to adopting some of these. The County Planning Department, with assistance from Cornell Cooperative Extension, runs an annual series of household hazardous waste and electronics recycling events. And I pretty much believe that all of these pictures are from our events. Public participation in these events, which remove toxic and hazardous material from the environment in a safe and controlled manner, keeping them out of the water cycle, has been expanding every year. Funded primarily by county and state funds, the program has also been supported by local sponsors such as the Emerson Foundation, Nucor, and Johnston Paper, and we're very appreciative of their funding support to keep that going. Also under standards, practices, and mitigation, the WQMA reviews and comments on various state and federal legislation related to water resource protection during public comment periods and makes recommendations to the legislature. Currently, the New York State DEC is revising its general permit for concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs, that we've all talked about. County staff and WQMA members recently reviewed the proposed changes to the CAFO permit regulations and submitted detailed comments to the Cayuga County Legislature. The legislature accepted the WQMA comments and recommendations and passed a resolution this past January standing behind the WQMA recommendations and submitting those comments to the New York State DEC for consideration from the legislature. And finally, under standards, practices, and mitigation efforts, the county legislature is poised to adopt a plan titled Improving Manure Management, a 14-point agenda for action. This effort to identify specific actions to address the impact of manure spreading on farmland within the county watersheds was spearheaded by legislators Keith Batman and Mike Didio. The county legislature is considering adoption on February 23rd. The Manure Management Working Group, comprised equally of farmers and water quality advocates, was established to work out a balanced and pragmatic action plan to improve the manner in which manure is managed by our dairy farms and to protect our land from the impacts from manure storage, transport, and spreading. The WQMA will likely be the primary agency that's involved in implementing the 14-point plan. The next area of water resource protection falls under the category of compliance and enforcement. The Cuyahoga County Health Department runs a septic system inspection program and testing program that is held up as a model for best practices across New York State. Started in 1994, the program has grown to deploy over 50 certified inspectors and conducts between 2,000 and 3,000 inspections of septic systems every year. The county program is unique and progressive in that the county, unlike other counties, requires periodic inspection of all septic systems in the county. The county also established an interdisciplinary team consisting of members from county planning, environmental health, county highway, soil and water conservation district, and the county's environmental engineer to review certain town and village projects for intermunicipal impacts, including water quality. New York State DEC has a critical role in compliance and enforcement efforts related to water quality, perhaps the most important of which is their CAFO inspection program. In New York, concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs, apply to farms over 300 cows. All CAFOs are required to obtain a state pollution discharge permit, general permit from the DEC. Under a CAFO permit, farmers must follow a comprehensive nutrient management plan that specifies the manure and fertilizer applications and best practices that will be followed to protect water quality. The DEC staff reviews the plan and inspects the CAFO farms periodically to determine if they're following their plan. Advocating for resources at the DEC to continue to and expand this inspection program is extremely important, and this was included in the comments brought together by the legislature to the DEC. And last but not least, under compliance and enforcement efforts is the Owasco Lake Watershed Inspection Program. Watershed Specialist Drew Snell will speak on this in a moment. The final category under countywide resource protection, though, is in education and communication. Education and communication is essential to making municipalities and the public aware of the work that needs to be done and to help get this work done. These bullets are a short list of the current educational communication efforts underway, and we know that we have to do more. The WQMA is creating a working group to focus specifically on how it communicates and how it educates the public about water resource planning. Please take note that the annual March to the Lake Day is coming up. The event will take place at Cuyahoga Community College on Saturday, March 5th from 9 to 12:30 p.m. at the college's Bisco Grove Theater. To transition to Watershed Inspector Drew Snell in the Owasco Lake Watershed Inspection Program, we're going to close this presentation and let Drew go on and talk about the efforts that are specific to the Owasco Lake Watershed Recreation Plan. The only one thing I would like to mention is this watershed plan that's currently underway, being prepared by our office, is a revision of the plan that was prepared originally in 2000, and the new watershed plan will address 6 key questions. Where are we now related to the natural, cultural, and political environment of the watershed? Where are we going? What processes and programs are currently in place to affect the future of the watershed? Where do we want to be, or what desirable conditions should we enhance, and what undesirable conditions should we minimize or eliminate to achieve the goals of the watershed? And how will we get there? What are the strategic goals and actions that we'll need to pursue to achieve the community vision for the watershed? When will we get there? When will the recommended projects and programs to advance these efforts be done, and how will the priority for these projects be established? And finally, how will we measure success, and what the plan is and what is the plan for tracking these improvements as we decide what else needs to be done? I just want to mention that we're going to have a watershed plan public meeting. It's going to be on Monday, February 29th at 7 p.m. at BOCES. And I will just move on now to the watershed inspection program. And Drew, you can please come up and talk about that. This is you.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Good morning, everyone. Yep, flip around, yeah. Thanks, Sam. I'm going to talk on this side of the podium. I hope you don't mind, so I can see what's going on up here, and also work the computer. Good morning. My name is Andrew Snell again, or Drew, as many call me. Thank you for the invite, members. Thanks for braving the elements this morning. Good to be here. I'm just going to really briefly talk about the inspection program, give you some background, talk about some of the initiatives that we're working on. My slideshow is going to be very brief, I guess you could say. It was very difficult for me to limit everything and narrow things down, but I managed. So, just some of the topics that I'm going to cover this morning. One being the significance of Owasco Lake. I'll just touch on that very briefly. Many of us already know the significance. However, there are some new faces in the crowd here that possibly don't know the significance. Some of the background of the inspection program, how it came to be and such, where we are funded from, and some of the current protective efforts that are underway through the program. Okay, so Steve kind of took it from a broad perspective, so I will start to kind of hone in on things and look at the watershed. Again, as Dan mentioned, the watershed is the drainage area. Everything flows to a certain point. So this is the area that encompasses Owasco Lake's watershed. It extends over 3 counties and to the south into Dryden in Tompkins County. This is my office, by the way. Okay, so some of the important highlights about the watershed as it relates to drinking water. It's, of course, the economic and tourism driver for the county. It's the hot spot for everyone to go to and recreate. Also, it's a wonderful fishery, if you didn't know that already. It's a source of drinking water for more than 48,000 people, and that is part of the municipal system network. And I'll touch a little bit more about that in the upcoming slides. Currently, there are roughly 16,500 residents living throughout the watershed, including the village of Moravia, the hamlet of Locke. The folks out in the rural areas depend on groundwater or well water as a source. So not only is it important to protect the lake as a surface water source, but also the groundwater in the watershed. Average daily usage, and this is treated water, again, that flows through the municipal systems, is roughly 4 million gallons per day. And that includes both the city of Auburn and the town of Owasco's treatment facilities. The lake contains 260 billion gallons, roughly, of water. Okay, so a common question. Who receives the water from the lake? The municipalities, the 13 on the left-hand side, of the table are the ones that are currently receiving water, treated water, from the lake. It's quite the extensive system that has been developed, quite a network of lines and systems that are in place, and it continues to grow. There's a bit of a twist of fate, if you will. There's only 3 towns on there that are inside the watershed that receive water from the lake. So I thought that was pretty interesting looking at that, how there's only 3 towns, probably only one of those towns, Owasco, has most of its population inside the watershed. So I thought that was quite interesting. And again, that number continues to expand each year. Right now it's roughly 48,000 folks that receive drinking water from the lake, treated. Been doing some research for this presentation. I came across the fact that the New York State Thruway also purchases water for the Port Byron service area. I had no idea that a line actually extended up there and runs through the median of the Thruway into the service station. So that was quite interesting to find out. Okay, so some background on the program. It began back in 2007. Senator Nozzolio provided a little bit of seed money towards the development of the program. I think it was in the way of $60,000 or so, give or take. It started out with 1 employee to cover the entire watershed with the sole position of doing enforcement on rules and regulations, and then to conduct frequent inspections of all of the tributaries throughout the watershed. Again, it encompasses 3 counties, Cayuga, Tompkins, and Onondaga, and 14 townships. The program's mission, as it was set up, is to make regular and thorough inspections of Owasco Lake, its water courses, its watershed, to ascertain compliance with the rules and regulations of the Owasco Lake watershed, and to provide education and outreach to the watershed community and to foster lake stewardship. The rules and regulations pertaining to this, they are part of Auburn, City of Auburn, Town of Owasco's Section 104.1, rules and regulations for public water safety. And as such, this allows the inspection program to enter private property in case there is a violation that may be occurring. So it allows us jurisdiction throughout the entire watershed on both public and private property. I should also note that the map to the right illustrates some of the sampling sites that we undertake almost on an annual basis. Those are pretty set. This is working with the ALA group, the Owasco Lake Watershed Association. These are primarily bacteria and nutrient sampling sites that we monitor very regularly throughout the watershed. And those are 21 sites, north, south, east, and west. And they are continuously expanding every year. Okay, so this is the general structure of the program. I'm hoping it's not too confusing. I tried to keep it pretty basic. And I'll start with the bottom there. The Owasco Lake Watershed Management Council is the sort of the governing body, if you will, that oversees the program. The Watershed Management Council is made up of county legislators, municipal officials from around the watershed, agency folks like Steve Lynch from planning. That group then has selected members as part of the technical advisory committee, which sort of is a more oversight of the program itself as we narrow down to the inspection program. And the Technical Advisory Committee reviews and administers watershed issues and concerns directly through the inspection program. So that's kind of the non-regulatory side of things. But then the inspection program is part of both. And we also do a piece of regulatory work which works cooperatively with DEC and the County Health Department on monitoring, on surveillance, and citations for violations. Key County Health Department and New York DEC, they are more in line with going after fines and litigations on ongoing issues, on reoccurring issues, those sorts of things that create water quality violations. Okay, so why do we monitor the watershed? We're doing it to reduce the contamination originating from the landscape. Over 208 square miles of land. That's the entire area of the watershed. And then there's approximately 270 linear miles of streams that we also monitor. So it's quite an undertaking to be vigilant of everything. So how do we do this? Well, my small staff and I, we drive around the watershed. We're very observant, very vigilant on things. We're trying to locate, specific areas of high nutrient levels and bacteria levels, hone in on those sources, and try to correct those issues. So what does that mean? What does that translate to? Lower levels of contaminants into the lake, fewer treatment processes, lower water bills for folks, for customers, and then of course more hours of safe recreational enjoyment on the lake. Okay, this slide is fairly busy, but it's very important to understand how the funding sources work for the program. Currently, the way it's structured, both the City of Auburn and the Town of Owasco, of course, pay for or receive a fee for water that is consumed through a rate that's established. Part of that rate, depending on how many gallons are used, goes back into the inspection program. So a small percentage, 6 cents per 750 gallons of water consumed by the City of Auburn, or 8 cents per 1,000 gallons at the Town of Owasco level, goes back into the inspection program. It's basically the same number when you look at it either way. Roughly 2 cents per 250 gallons of water consumed. So the portion goes back into provide funding towards the inspection program, which then translates into about $4.80 per resident per year for the inspection program. So a very small amount goes back into the inspection program as a result of water usage through municipal water networks. So when it boils right down to cents per day, it's about 1 cent a day per household for water use, which I did some number crunching compared to a 12-ounce bottle of water, which is $1.09. We'd be looking at roughly $44 million 12-ounce bottles per day that's treated through the system. That's very important considering the news these days with source water pollution. Near Detroit, Flint, Michigan is having issues. They're now having to truck in bottled water. So you can imagine the expense that they're going through right now with having to do that compared to protecting their sources, from the get-go. So what does this current funding provide? It's fairly bare bones at the moment. And I should say that last year, the town of Owasco, the city of Auburn, did approve a slight increase on the water usage rates that would go back into the inspection program. And I believe it was 2 cents for the city and for the town of Owasco. Still, that allowed me to hire on one additional inspector, full-time inspector. We still continue with our seasonal staff approach, having some college students come in to assist with some seasonal duties. It allows us to have 2 inspection program vehicles, and it provides for some sampling equipment. Okay, so with a fairly small budget, we're able to accomplish quite a bit. Some of the ongoing activities that we're involved with, we assist everyone throughout the watershed with issues, whether it's drainage, whether it's erosion, septic systems. We're there to assist. We're there to try and eliminate any sort of violation protocols that may be forthcoming. We sample surface water, of course, as mentioned before, for nutrient levels, for bacteria. Now we're getting, as Stephen mentioned, we're upping our efforts for algae monitoring, for harmful blue-green algae. Frequent monitoring of the tributaries that feed Owasco Lake. There's the map on the right-hand side that illustrates all of the protected streams in the watershed. And again, it's roughly 270 linear miles of stream that we look at. We educate the residents about the rules and regulations. For repeat offenders, we issue notifications for violations, trying to get folks to comply with the rules and regulations before it comes down to litigation or ultimately the fines. And then, of course, we assist partner agencies with ongoing efforts to protect water quality, soil and water, Natural Resource Conservation Service, planning, and DOH, the Health Department. Okay, current watershed initiatives. So these are just some of the things that we are now underway on top of what our normal goals, but our traditional goals have been, I'm now taking the program to another level, hoping to get some additional funding for it, for the program, for the residents around the watershed to protect the lake and the tributaries. So here are some of the things that we're now involved with. Tributary identification and road crossing signage, which will engage the public in certain towns and eventually the entire watershed with identifying tributaries, where they are in spatially, so allowing them to georeference their specific location and to find out where that tributary originates from and what problems may be associated with that trip. It also helps with reporting back to us if there are indeed any water quality issues. Harmful algal bloom monitoring, of course I mentioned that this year. Road ditch stabilization with all the towns throughout the watershed. We're looking very closely at erosion in ditches and stabilizing those areas to prevent sedimentation. And then of course we have a tree replacement nursery project that's going on right now as a pilot with the Owasco Elementary School and with the town of Owasco as a community tree replacement for aging and dying trees throughout the community. And the goal to include a cooperative effort towards watershed and lake protection with all the residents in the communities. And with that, I will turn it back over to Dan.
I'm going to ask Drew and Steve to keep handy here. We're going to shift into some Q&A and hope that we have some comments, questions from the audience. And just see who's got something to throw at them. Sue.
The clerk's office, we write 5 checks a month to regional or state agencies. And for instance, we help Central, it's a regional Central Transportation Authority, and we give money to that. We give money to the New York State Archives or New York State Department of Education to help preserve our records. I mean, I think this is such an important thing. Maybe this is something regionally that we could also make, you know, Finger Lakes region, water protected, whatever it is, it's so important to our region. Maybe that's an idea where money could come from on a, you know, a regular basis. Just an idea.
We like that idea.
Well, when you think about, it just struck me as I was listening to the program this morning, not that you asked me this question, but if you had to have this topic be on the agenda 15 years ago in this community to talk about what we're doing in this community proactively to protect our water resources, I think the conversation would have been about 10 minutes long. And I think we just scratched the surface this morning. So it kind of tells you kind of what we've done to move forward to try to get ahead of these issues before they turn into issues like Onondaga Lake. And you drive down 690 in Syracuse and you see what it takes when you've let a water resource go beyond and not be attended to. And the money that was spent, and even then, I don't know that that's going to be the solution that anyone is really hopeful for. So to see what we're doing in this community and figure out a way that it can be sustained and funded on an ongoing basis, I think is some smart ideas. Jane?
You know, I remember years ago learning that the movement in the country to pick up litter, I'm going way back, it was a big deal in the 60s. The research showed that the best way to educate a community was through its children. And I wondered how you're linking to the educational systems within the watershed, if there's active programs going on.
Steve, Drew?
Well, one of the efforts that's in the 14-point agenda for action on manure management is to have the working group that was created go out into the elementary schools and connect with the schools to bring that message out to the community through exactly that, through the children. And Drew, I think that you probably do some work with the schools as well.
We do, and that was one of the highlights of some of the ongoing efforts. The community tree replacement nursery was placed at the Owasco Elementary School just for that reason, to involve the elementary school kids in doing replacement services for the trees in their neighborhoods. And then we're going to actually expand that eventually to include riparian areas, which are those areas that are along streams that provide shade and habitat, as well as along the lake shores. So that's one effort, and I like that you mentioned the issue with litter cleanup. For some reason I've been particularly sensitive to it this year. I don't know if it's the lack of snow and it just sticks out all that much more, but I'd like to get something a little more increased efforts in terms of cleanup around the watershed involving the towns especially. There are Adopt a Highway programs that are through the state DOT. However, I'd like to see more town involvement and with the youth groups in those towns becoming more involved with roadside cleanup.
There's a great project for Leadership Q to Jenny, right? Just put some thought behind those types of ideas, right? Who else? Paul?
And the fee that you are getting per gallon, per 1,000 gallons, is that based only on the processed water, or is it and used only within the city and or the town of Owasco, or does that fee extend out to who else they sell the water to?
Yes, the fee is extended out beyond the city and the town. So everyone that receives treated water actually pays towards that small fee.
One more question, then we're going to wrap up time.
Can you just make some comments about it seems like things have gotten a lot worse in the last couple of years. The reeds are really encroaching, the algae. Is there any treatment that's going on, or is it just prevention? And, we're not cutting down the reeds anymore. I haven't seen the reed cutters out this last year. They were out previous years. Can you just make some comments about what's going on now, and also lowering the level? I think you were trying to kill some of the mussels, et cetera. Can you just tell us what's going on with the lake like now?
Yeah, I could expand on that just for a moment, Tom. I cut my presentation a couple of slides short. One of the efforts that we're engaged in is the Owasco Flats Wetland Creation and Restoration Project. That'll create wetlands down in the Owasco Flats at the southern end of the lake and sort of restore the functional balance and the function of the wetlands that were changed when the Army Corps of Engineers put that channel through there along the outlet. What that'll do is that'll trap the sediments in these wetlands that are laden with phosphorus and keep them from coming into the lake, and then they'll be periodically harvested as the created wetlands are managed over time. And that's a project that's being funded by $715,000 grant from the Environmental Facilities Corporation with $75,000 matching from the county. So that's just one aspect of that. I think you mentioned the invasive species program, where we look to lower the lake levels and freeze the Asian clams, et cetera. So all of these efforts are they're mitigation efforts. As far as treating the water, I think the science and the research is moving forward. On blue-green algae, it's not a very straightforward answer to the question of blue-green algae, with the exception that the more that we can reduce the nutrients in the lake through all of these efforts, the better chance we have of fighting the blue-green algae and keeping that from reoccurring.
Let's thank Steve and Drew one more time for giving us our morning dose of knowledge and information. You're all deputized to go forward. A couple of quick things just to kind of recap on. You heard about a couple of different meetings coming up. On the 29th at BOCES is the presentation of the new plan for Owasco Lake. And then on March 5th is March to the Lake Day at Community College. And I think we're told that there's some flyers out on the table for some more information about that on your way out. Housekeeping wise, one little detail. I know we're back here next month. Can't tell you what we're talking about, right? You know? No? We're talking about something next month.
It's going to be exciting and engaging.
There you go. But the one thing I wanted to mention, Lisa Carr made a mention that for those of you, and I know the parking lot was a little more full this morning than some months, but across the street some folks parked at the credit union, and I think they said that they like to get those cars out of there by 9 because they've got lots of customers coming in supposedly, but so don't delay, otherwise you might not find your car. Just a public service announcement. So with that, I think we're all set. Thank you.